The dust cloud rising behind the stagecoach announced her arrival to Las Animas, Colorado, before anyone could see her face. And when Hannah Ashford stepped down onto the sun-baked street with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a photograph so faded the faces were barely visible, every eye in town turned to watch the stranger who looked like she had traveled through hell itself to get there. The year was 1878, and Las Animas was a town caught between the old ways and the new, where cattle drives still thundered through on their way north, and the railroad promised prosperity that hadn't quite materialized yet. Hannah's boots hit the wooden planks of the sidewalk with a hollow sound that seemed to echo her emptiness. She was 23 years old, though the journey had aged her in ways that didn't show on her face, but lived behind her green eyes. The photograph in her hand trembled slightly as she stood there, uncertain where to go next. It showed two people standing in front of a ranch house, the details worn away by years of handling and the tears that had fallen on it during desperate moments. Her brother Thomas had sent it 3 years ago with a letter saying he had found work here, that he was building a life, that she should come when she could. But Thomas's letters had stopped coming 18 months ago, and Hannah had spent every day since working herself to exhaustion in a St. Louis boarding house to save enough money for this journey west. "You look lost, miss." The voice belonged to an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face weathered but kind. "I'm Martha Sullivan. I run the boarding house here." Hannah cleared her throat, her voice hoarse from the dust of travel. "I'm looking for someone, Thomas Ashford. He worked on one of the ranches around here." Martha's expression changed, sympathy flooding her features, and Hannah felt her stomach drop even before the words came. "Oh, honey. Thomas was a good man. There was an accident about a year and a half back, a stampede. He and 2 others didn't make it. I'm so sorry." The world tilted. Hannah had known, somewhere deep inside, that something terrible must have happened for Thomas to stop writing. But knowing and hearing it confirmed were 2 different kinds of pain. Her brother had been all she had left after their parents died of fever, after the fire that took their small farm, after every other loss that had stripped her life down to bare survival. "I have nowhere to go," Hannah heard herself say, the words coming from somewhere far away. "I spent everything I had to get here." Martha took her elbow gently, guiding her toward the shade of the general store's awning. "Now don't you worry about that just yet. Let's get you some water and figure this out. Las Animas might be small, but we take care of our own, and anyone who was kin to Thomas Ashford is one of us." The water was cool and sweet, drawn from a well that tapped into the Arkansas River. Hannah drank deeply, trying to gather her scattered thoughts. Around her, the town moved with the lazy afternoon rhythm of a place where the heat dictated the pace of life. Cowboys lounged outside the saloon, their horses tied to the rail. A freight wagon creaked past, loaded with supplies. Children ran between buildings, their laughter a sharp contrast to the heaviness in her heart. "Thomas worked for Bennett Oakley," Martha said, watching Hannah carefully. "The Oakley Ranch is about 5 miles west of here, biggest spread in the county. Bennett is a fair man, about 30 years old, took over the ranch when his father passed some years back. He took Thomas's death hard. Your brother was more than just a hand to him, they were friends." Hannah looked down at the photograph again, at the ghostly figures that might have been her brother and this Bennett Oakley. "Do you think he might know anything about what Thomas wanted for me? Why he asked me to come here? Only one way to find out. Bennett comes into town every Saturday for supplies. That's tomorrow. You can stay at my place tonight, no charge. Consider it a welcome to Las Animas." The boarding house was clean and simple, with whitewashed walls and curtains that moved in the slight breeze from the open windows. Martha showed Hannah to a small room at the back, where a narrow bed and a washstand constituted all the furniture. It was more than Hannah had hoped for, and she found herself fighting tears at the kindness of this stranger. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar town, Hannah held the photograph to her chest and let herself grieve properly for the first time. Thomas had been 5 years older, always protective, always promising that things would get better. He had headed west first, determined to establish something stable before sending for her. And he had died trying to build that dream. Morning came with the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. Hannah washed her face in the basin, changed into her only other dress, a faded blue cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean, and made her way downstairs. Martha was cooking breakfast for her boarders, 3 men who worked at the rail yard, and she loaded a plate for Hannah without asking. "Eat up. You're too thin. And Bennett usually gets to town around 9, so you have time." The food was simple but good, eggs and bacon and biscuits with gravy. Hannah ate mechanically, her mind already spinning ahead to the meeting with this rancher who had been her brother's friend. What would she say? What could she possibly ask of him? She had no claims here, no rights to anything Thomas might have left behind, and she suspected a ranch hand didn't leave much anyway. 9 o'clock found her standing outside the general store, watching the road that led west out of town. Martha stood with her, a supportive presence that Hannah was grateful for. Other townspeople went about their business, but she could feel their curious glances. New arrivals were always noteworthy, especially young women traveling alone. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, and she saw a rider coming into town on a large bay horse. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about the way he sat the saddle, a natural authority that spoke of someone comfortable with responsibility. As he drew closer, Hannah could make out more details. A tall man with broad shoulders, wearing a work-worn shirt and leather vest, a hat pulled low against the sun, and a face that was tanned and strong-featured, with a jaw that suggested stubbornness and eyes that held both intelligence and a deep-seated weariness. Bennett Oakley dismounted in one fluid motion, tying his horse to the rail with practiced ease. He nodded to Martha first, his manners automatic, before his gaze settled on Hannah. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and Hannah felt an unexpected jolt run through her, something electric and startling that had nothing to do with her grief or her desperate circumstances. "Bennett, this is Hannah Ashford," Martha said, her voice gentle. "Thomas's sister." Everything in Bennett's expression changed. The polite distance vanished, replaced by something raw and painful. "Miss Ashford," he said, his voice deeper than she expected, roughened by emotion. "I didn't know Thomas had sent for you. I didn't know you were coming." "He sent for me 3 years ago," Hannah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "But I couldn't come until now. I only learned yesterday that he had passed." Bennett removed his hat, running a hand through dark brown hair that was slightly too long. His eyes, she saw now, were a striking blue-gray, the color of storm clouds. "He talked about you all the time. His little sister back east. He was saving money to bring you out proper, wanted to have enough set aside to make sure you'd be taken care of when you got here." The tears came then, unbidden and unstoppable. Hannah pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to contain the sob that wanted to break free. She felt Martha's arm around her shoulders, heard the older woman making soothing sounds, but it was Bennett who stepped forward with a clean handkerchief, pressing it into her hands with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "I'm sorry," Hannah managed to say. "I promised myself I wouldn't fall apart." "You're entitled to fall apart," Bennett said quietly. "Thomas was a good man, one of the best I knew. The day he died, a part of this town died with him. He saved 2 other men before the cattle got him. That's the kind of person he was. They stood there on the street, 3 people bound by grief for someone who had left too soon. Finally, Bennett cleared his throat and looked at Martha. "Has she got somewhere to stay?" "With me for now," Martha said. "But Bennett, she spent everything getting here. She's going to need work." Hannah straightened, wiping her eyes with the handkerchief. "I can work. I'm strong and I'm not afraid of hard work. I can cook, clean, mend, help with animals. I worked in a boarding house for 2 years. I'll do whatever needs doing." Bennett was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Finally, he said, "Thomas had wages coming that were never claimed. I've been holding them, thinking maybe there was family somewhere. That money is yours by right. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to keep you going for a few months while you figure out what you want to do." "I can't just take money," Hannah protested. "Let me earn it. If you have work, I'll work for it." Something flickered in Bennett's expression, a mix of respect and something else she couldn't quite name. "My housekeeper left 3 months ago to move back east with her daughter. The house is a mess. I'm living on burned coffee and worse food, and I could use someone who knows their way around a kitchen and can keep the place from falling down around my ears. But it's hard work, Miss Ashford. Ranch life isn't easy, and I'm not an easy man to work for. I'm up before dawn, I work until after dark, and I expect the same dedication from everyone on my payroll. When can I start?" The words were out before Hannah could second-guess them. Bennett almost smiled, just a slight quirk at the corner of his mouth. "Let's say Monday. That gives you 2 days to settle in and get your bearings. I'll come by Sunday afternoon to take you out to the ranch. Bring whatever you have. There's a small house near the main building where the housekeeper used to stay. It'll be yours as long as you work for me." After Bennett left to conduct his business in town, Martha pulled Hannah aside with a knowing look in her eyes. "That man hasn't shown that much emotion since Thomas died. He's been like a stone wall, working himself into the ground. But you got through to him somehow." Hannah shook her head. "He's just being kind because of Thomas." "Maybe," Martha said, but her tone suggested she didn't believe it for a second. "But I've known Bennett Oakley since he was a boy, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he just looked at you." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and nervous anticipation. Martha took Hannah to the general store, where she used a small portion of the money Thomas had left to buy practical clothes suitable for ranch work. Sturdy skirts, cotton blouses, a split-riding skirt that made Martha nod approvingly, boots that would stand up to mud and weather, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the relentless sun. The storekeeper, a thin man named George Potter, added items without charging her. A good knife, work gloves, and a warm shawl for cold mornings. "Thomas would have wanted you looked after," he said simply when Hannah tried to protest. Sunday afternoon arrived with cloudless skies and heat that shimmered off the dirt streets. Hannah was ready, her few possessions packed in the carpet bag, wearing her new clothes and feeling more prepared than she had since leaving St. Louis. When Bennett arrived driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 draft horses, her heart did that strange flutter again, and she told herself firmly it was just nerves about the new job. Bennett loaded her bag into the wagon bed with an ease that spoke of his strength, then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. The moment their hands touched, even through the gloves they both wore, Hannah felt that electric connection again, stronger this time. Bennett's eyes met hers, and she saw her own startled awareness reflected there before he quickly looked away, releasing her hand once she was settled. The ride to the ranch took them west along a well-worn road that followed the Arkansas River Valley. Bennett was quiet at first, focused on driving, but gradually he began to point out landmarks and share information about the area. His voice, Hannah discovered, was soothing in its steadiness, each word chosen with care. "The ranch has been in my family for 22 years, he explained as they crested a rise that revealed the spread of land before them. "My father came out here right after the war, bought the land for almost nothing because it was considered worthless. But he saw what it could be with work and water rights. He built it up from nothing, and when he died 6 years ago, it became mine." Hannah looked out over the vista, and her breath caught. The land rolled in gentle waves toward distant mountains, grassland interspersed with cottonwoods that marked the path of streams and springs. Cattle dotted the landscape, red and white Herefords that Bennett said were the future of ranching. The main house was visible in the middle distance, a 2-story structure of wood and stone that looked solid and permanent, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Bennett glanced at her and his expression softened. Thomas thought so too. He said it reminded him of stories his mother used to tell him about the frontier, about wide open spaces where a person could breathe. "He told me once that he wanted to bring you here because he thought you'd love it the same way he did." The mention of her brother brought tears to Hannah's eyes again, but they were gentler tears this time, mixed with gratitude that Thomas had found a place he loved before he died, and that he had found a friend like Bennett Oakley. The wagon rolled into the ranch yard, and immediately Hannah could see what Bennett meant about needing help. The house itself was well built and sturdy, but the windows were dusty, the porch needed sweeping, and various items were scattered around in a way that spoke of a man too busy with the demands of running a ranch to worry about domestic order. Several ranch hands were visible near the barn, and they stopped their work to watch the wagon's arrival with frank curiosity. Bennett brought the team to a halt and set the brake before jumping down. He came around to help Hannah down, and she was acutely aware of his hands on her waist, the casual strength with which he lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Her hands rested on his shoulders for balance, and for a moment they were close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his blue-gray eyes, could smell the scent of leather and sage that clung to him. "Thank you," she managed to say, and he released her quickly, stepping back as if he too had felt something he wasn't sure how to handle. 3 men approached from the barn, walking with the rolling gait of men who spent most of their time on horseback. Bennett introduced them. Charlie Mason, the foreman, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a grizzled beard. Young Jake Hartley, barely 20, eager and friendly, and Sam Torres, a quiet man of Mexican and Apache heritage whose dark eyes assessed Hannah with intelligence and reservation. "Boys, this is Hannah Ashford, Thomas's sister. She'll be taking over as housekeeper starting tomorrow. I expect you to treat her with respect and help her with anything she needs while she's settling in." "Madam," they said in near unison, tipping their hats. Charlie stepped forward with a sad smile. "Your brother was a good friend. I'm real sorry for your loss. If there's anything you need, anything at all, you just say the word." "Thank you," Hannah said, touched by the genuine warmth in his voice. "I appreciate that more than you know." Bennett showed her to the small house that would be hers, a 2-room cabin with a bedroom, a sitting area with a small stove for cooking and heat, and windows that looked out toward the mountains. It was simple but clean, and someone, probably Bennett himself, had made sure there was fresh bedding on the bed and wood stacked by the stove. "I know it's not much," Bennett said, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands, looking suddenly uncertain in a way that made him seem younger. "But it's sturdy and it's private. You'll have your own space." "It's perfect," Hannah assured him, and she meant it. After years of sharing cramped quarters in boarding houses, having her own space felt like an unimaginable luxury. "Truly, Mr. Oakley, this is more than I expected." "Bennett," he said quietly. "Just call me Bennett. We're not formal out here, and if you're going to be working for me, we might as well dispense with the unnecessary titles." "Then you should call me Hannah." He nodded, his eyes holding hers for a moment that stretched just a beat too long. "Hannah, that's a good name. It suits you." He showed her the main house next, and Hannah could immediately see the work that needed doing. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, but every surface was cluttered with unwashed dishes, old newspapers, and the detritus of a man living alone. The parlor was dusty, the furniture good but neglected. Upstairs there were 4 bedrooms, 3 of which were clearly unused and filled with stored items. "I've been living like a bachelor," Bennett admitted, looking embarrassed. "Which I guess I am, but it's no excuse for letting things get this bad. My mother would be horrified." "Where is your mother?" Hannah asked, then worried she had overstepped, but Bennett didn't seem offended. "She passed when I was 17, just a year after my father. There was a fever that went through the territory. She was helping nurse others when she caught it herself." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Hannah heard the old pain beneath the words. "It's been just me ever since, except for the hands and the housekeeper, until she left." "I'm sorry," Hannah said softly. "It seems we've both known our share of loss. Maybe that's why Thomas and I got along so well. We understood each other's ghosts." Bennett moved to the window, looking out over his land. "He used to say that the best way to honor the dead was to live well, to build something that would last. I'm trying to do that with this ranch. Some days it feels possible. Other days it feels like I'm just treading water." Hannah moved to stand beside him, drawn by something in his voice, something lonely and determined all at once. "Then maybe it's good I'm here. At least you'll have clean dishes and decent food while you're treading water." He laughed, a real laugh that transformed his face, making him look younger and less burdened. "I'll settle for coffee that doesn't taste like mud and food that doesn't fight back." They stood there together, looking out at the land turning golden in the late afternoon sun, and Hannah felt something shift inside her. This place, this ranch, even this complicated man beside her, they all felt like pieces of something she hadn't known she was looking for. It was too soon to call it home, but it was the first glimmer of possibility she had felt in longer than she could remember. Bennett left her to settle in, saying he'd ring the bell for supper at 6 if she wanted to join him and the hands in the main house. Hannah spent the remaining hours unpacking her few belongings, arranging them in the little cabin, and trying to calm the nervous excitement that fluttered in her chest. Tomorrow she would start work, would begin building a new life from the ashes of the old one. But tonight, she could rest and let herself feel the first tentative shoots of hope. The supper bell rang at 6 as promised, and Hannah made her way to the main house, following the sound of male voices and laughter. The dining room was large enough to accommodate the ranch hands, and they were already seated when she entered. Bennett stood at the head of the table, and his face brightened when he saw her. "Hannah, come sit here." He indicated the chair to his right, and she settled into it, acutely aware of being the only woman in a room full of men. But their manners were impeccable, and the conversation stayed appropriate as they passed around platters of beef, potatoes, and beans that Bennett admitted he'd bought already cooked from Martha's boarding house. "This is the last time we'll eat like this," Bennett announced. "Starting tomorrow, Hannah will be working her magic in the kitchen, and we'll see what real food tastes like again." "No pressure," Hannah said dryly, and the men laughed over the meal. She learned more about the ranch and the men who worked it. Charlie had been with Bennett's father from the beginning and was fiercely loyal to the family. Jake was new, learning the trade, full of enthusiasm and questions. Sam had worked for the ranch for 3 years and was the best horseman Bennett had ever seen. There were 5 other hands who worked the far ranges and only came to the main house occasionally. As the evening wore on and the conversation flowed, Hannah found herself relaxing, joining in the easy banter and feeling more welcome than she had expected. But it was Bennett she kept finding herself aware of. The way he listened to his men with genuine interest. The way he smiled when Jake told an earnest story about a calf he'd helped deliver. The way his eyes kept finding hers across the table as if checking to make sure she was comfortable. When the meal was finished and the men drifted off to their bunkhouse or evening chores, Bennett walked Hannah back to her cabin. The sun had set, and the sky was a riot of colors, purple and orange and pink spreading across the horizon. The air was cooler now, pleasant after the heat of the day. "Thank you for dinner," Hannah said when they reached her door, "and for everything else. For the job, the cabin, for being kind when you didn't have to be." Bennett shook his head. "I'm not being kind, I'm being practical. I need help and you need work. It's a fair exchange." "But," he paused, and in the twilight his expression was hard to read, "I am glad you're here. Thomas would have wanted me to look after you and I'd want to do it anyway, even if he hadn't." "Why?" The question came out before Hannah could stop it. Too direct, too revealing of her own confusion about what was happening between them. Bennett took a step closer, and Hannah's breath caught. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and in the fading light they looked almost silver. "Because from the moment I saw you standing in town, looking lost but determined not to show it, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. Like maybe there was more to life than just work and duty. Like maybe there was still room for something good." The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility. Hannah's heart was racing, and she knew she should step back, should maintain some professional distance. But she didn't want to. She wanted to stay right here, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. "Bennett," she whispered, not even sure what she wanted to say. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were calloused but gentle, and the touch sent shivers down her spine. "Get some rest, Hannah. Tomorrow will be a long day." Then he stepped back, tipped his hat, and walked away into the gathering darkness, leaving Hannah standing at her door with her heart pounding and her mind spinning. She pressed her hand to her cheek where his fingers had been and tried to make sense of what was happening. She had been here less than a day. She had come looking for her brother and found only his grave. She should be mourning, should be focused on survival, not feeling this overwhelming attraction to a man who was essentially her employer. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her, the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, it was Bennett's face she saw when she closed her eyes. The way he had looked at her in the twilight, with something like wonder mixed with his usual careful control. And she knew, with a certainty that should have frightened her, but instead felt inevitable, that she was already falling for the rancher who had given her a chance when she had nothing left. Morning came early on a ranch, and Hannah woke to the sound of roosters crowing and men's voices calling to each other. She dressed quickly in her practical work clothes and made her way to the main house just as the sky was brightening from black to gray. Bennett was already in the kitchen, trying to coax coffee from a battered pot on the stove. "Let me," Hannah said, and he stepped aside with visible relief. She assessed the kitchen with the practiced eye of someone who had worked in food service for years. The stove was good quality. The pantry was surprisingly well stocked with staples, and there was a spring house nearby that Bennett showed her where milk, butter, and other perishables were kept cool. Within an hour, she had coffee brewing properly, eggs frying, bacon crisping, and biscuits baking in the oven. The men filed in one by one, drawn by the smell of real breakfast, and their faces when they tasted Hannah's cooking were comical in their delight. "Madam, you're an angel," Jake declared through a mouthful of biscuit, and Charlie actually looked misty-eyed as he drank coffee that didn't taste like boiled dirt. But it was Bennett's reaction that made Hannah's heart soar. He took one bite of the eggs, one sip of the coffee, and his whole face transformed. "This is incredible," he said simply, and the way he looked at her made her feel like she'd given him something far more valuable than breakfast. After the meal, the men headed out to their various tasks, and Hannah set about cleaning the kitchen thoroughly. Bennett lingered, clearly wanting to say something but uncertain how to begin. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "I need to ride out to the north pasture today to check on the herd. It'll take most of the day. Will you be all right here alone?" "I'll be fine," Hannah assured him. "I have plenty to keep me busy." He nodded but still didn't leave, and Hannah turned to face him fully, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is there something else? Last night," Bennett began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I don't want you to think I make a habit of saying things like that to women who work for me. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable or pressured." Hannah considered her words carefully. "I don't feel pressured, and for what it's worth, I felt it too, whatever it was, is. But you're right that this is complicated. I've been here barely a day, I'm grieving my brother, and I work for you. So maybe we should just focus on that for now. On me doing my job and you running your ranch. And if there's something more, well, we'll figure it out as we go." Relief and something like admiration crossed Bennett's face. "You're a wise woman, Hannah Ashford. I've had to be. Life doesn't leave much room for foolishness when you're trying to survive." After Bennett left, Hannah threw herself into work with a determination that bordered on desperate. She cleaned the kitchen until it gleamed, scrubbing years of accumulated grime from surfaces. She tackled the parlor next, beating the dust from curtains, polishing furniture, organizing the clutter into some semblance of order. The physical labor felt good, giving her racing thoughts something to focus on besides the confusing tangle of grief, attraction, and uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm her. By midday, she had made remarkable progress, and she fixed herself a simple lunch of bread and cheese, eating while standing at the kitchen window and looking out over the ranch. In the distance, she could see some of the hands working with horses in a large corral. Closer by, chickens scratched in their yard, and a lazy dog she hadn't noticed before dozed in a patch of shade. This could be her life, she thought. Not just working here, but belonging here. Building something permanent after years of drifting. The possibility was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. The afternoon brought its own rhythms. Hannah explored the springhouse, cataloging what was available and making mental notes of what would need to be purchased on the next town trip. She started preparations for supper, a beef stew that could simmer for hours, and made 2 pies with canned peaches she found in the pantry. The work was familiar and soothing, and she found herself humming as she rolled out the pie crust, an old song her mother used to sing. Bennett returned as the sun was starting its descent toward the western mountains. Hannah heard his horse before she saw him, the sound of hoofbeats carrying across the quiet afternoon. She watched from the window as he dismounted, spoke briefly with Charlie, and then headed toward the house. He looked tired, dust-covered, and wonderful, and Hannah's traitorous heart did that flip again. He entered through the back door, pulling off his hat and stopping dead when he saw the transformed kitchen. His eyes widened as he took in the clean surfaces, the organized pantry, the pies cooling on the windowsill and the pot of stew bubbling on the stove. "Hannah, this is amazing. How did you do all this in one day?" she shrugged, trying to hide her pleasure at his reaction. "It's what you hired me for. There's hot water in the reservoir if you want to wash up before supper. The hands should be coming in soon." Supper that night was a celebration of sorts, though no one said so explicitly. The men ate with the appreciation of people who had been living on inadequate food for too long, and the conversation was livelier than it had been the night before. Hannah found herself telling stories about St. Louis, about the boarding house and its eccentric residents, and the men responded with tales of life on the ranch, of cattle drives and wild weather, and the characters who drifted through Las Animas. But beneath the easy conversation, Hannah was constantly aware of Bennett at the head of the table. The way he laughed at Jake's jokes, the way he listened to Sam's observations about the upcoming season, the way his eyes found hers repeatedly across the table, holding her gaze just a moment too long to be casual. The way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, with an expression that mixed desire with something deeper, something that looked almost like awe. After the meal, when the dishes were washed and the kitchen set to rights for the next day, Bennett walked her back to her cabin again. It was becoming a routine already, this twilight walk between the two houses, and Hannah found herself looking forward to these few minutes of relative privacy. "You worked too hard today," Bennett said as they walked slowly, stretching out the brief journey. "The house didn't get that dirty overnight. You don't have to fix everything at once." "I needed to keep busy," Hannah admitted. "When I'm still, I think too much. About Thomas, about everything I've lost, about how uncertain everything is. Working helps." Bennett was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I understand that. After my parents died, I worked myself nearly to death for about 2 years. Charlie finally sat me down and told me that I was going to kill myself if I didn't learn to rest. That the ranch would still be here tomorrow, but I wouldn't be any good to it if I worked myself into an early grave. Did you listen to him? Eventually. It's hard though, isn't it? To allow yourself to stop, to rest, to feel things when feeling them hurts so much." They had reached her cabin, but neither of them moved toward the door. Above them, stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue sky, thousands of them visible in a way they never had been in St. Louis. A coyote called in the distance, and another answered, their voices eerie and beautiful in the quiet. "I keep thinking about what you said yesterday," Hannah found herself confessing. "About feeling like there might be room for something good. I haven't let myself hope for that in a long time. It feels dangerous, like I'm tempting fate." Bennett turned to face her fully, and in the starlight his features were softened, younger. "I've been thinking about it too, probably more than I should, and I know we said we'd take it slow, focus on the practical things. But I want you to know something, Hannah. You being here, it's already changed things for me. The house feels like a home again. Coming back after a long day feels like returning to something instead of just stopping work temporarily. And when I look at you—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "When I look at you, I see a future I'd stopped letting myself imagine." Hannah's breath caught. "Bennett, we barely know each other. I know. And I know it's too soon, and it's complicated, and there are 100 reasons we should be sensible about this. But I've been sensible for 6 years, Hannah. I've been responsible and careful and focused on duty, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. You make me feel alive again." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. The touch was gentle but electric, and Hannah felt it all the way to her core. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just needed you to know, so that you're not wondering, so that you understand what this is, at least for me." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, work roughened and strong. She should pull away. She should maintain boundaries. She should be practical and careful and all the things a woman in her position needed to be. But she didn't want to. She wanted to be brave enough to reach for something good, even if it might not last, even if it might end in heartbreak. "For me too," she whispered. "It's the same for me. I don't understand it and it scares me, but I feel it. This pull toward you, like something in me recognizes something in you." Bennett's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, they were blazing with emotion. "Then we'll figure it out together. No rush, no pressure. Just honest about what we're feeling and where this might go." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that it made Hannah's eyes prick with tears. Then he released her hand and stepped back, putting proper distance between them again. "Good night, Hannah. Sleep well." "Good night, Bennett." She watched him walk back to the main house, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Inside her cabin, she pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart racing beneath her palm. She had come to Las Animas with nothing but a faded photograph and shattered dreams. But maybe, just maybe, she was finding something better than she had lost, something real and solid and full of promise. The days settled into a rhythm that felt both new and timeless. Hannah rose before dawn to start breakfast, learning what each man preferred, how Bennett liked his coffee black and strong, how Charlie had a sweet tooth that made him reach for extra helpings of any dessert she made, how young Jake was always hungry and Sam ate with careful appreciation, as if good food was a gift he never took for granted. She cleaned and organized the house room by room, uncovering beautiful furniture and personal items that told the story of the Oakley family. In Bennett's father's old study, she found photographs of a stern-looking man with Bennett's eyes and a laughing woman who must have been his mother. There were books on ranching and history, ledgers carefully kept, and a violin in a case that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. "My mother played," Bennett said one evening when he found her looking at it. "She tried to teach me, but I didn't have her patience for it. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to sell it or give it away, but I couldn't bear to hear it played either." "Do you still feel that way?" Hannah asked gently. He considered the question seriously. "I don't know. Maybe not anymore. Maybe enough time has passed that I could hear music in this house again without it breaking my heart." Hannah carefully lifted the violin from its case. The wood glowed in the lamplight, beautiful and well cared for despite the years of silence. "I had some lessons when I was young. I'm not very good, but I remember a few simple things." She tucked the instrument under her chin, adjusted the bow, and played a slow, simple melody, one of the first pieces she had learned. The notes were pure and sweet, filling the study with sound that the room had been missing. When she finished, she looked up to find Bennett staring at her with an expression of such raw emotion that it took her breath away. "That was the song she played most often," he said, his voice rough. "Her favorite. How did you know?" "I didn't. It's just one of the only pieces I can play properly." Hannah set the violin back in its case with careful reverence. "I'm sorry if it brought back painful memories." "No," Bennett said quickly. "No, it brought back good ones. The good ones have been buried under the pain for so long that I'd almost forgotten they were there. Thank you for reminding me." They stood close together in the lamplit study, surrounded by the remnants of his family's life, and something shifted between them. The connection that had been building since the moment they met deepened, became something more substantial. Bennett reached out and gently cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You're extraordinary, do you know that?" Hannah leaned into his touch, letting herself have this moment of closeness. "I'm just ordinary, trying to survive." "There's nothing ordinary about you," Bennett said firmly. "The way you've picked yourself up after losing everything. The way you've thrown yourself into making a life here. The way you see beauty and possibility where I'd started only seeing obligation. That's not ordinary, Hannah. That's courage." She turned her face to press a kiss against his palm, a gesture of affection that felt natural despite their short acquaintance. Bennett's breath caught, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her properly. But instead, he let his hand fall away and stepped back, his expression a mix of desire and restraint. "We should probably say goodnight before I do something we're not quite ready for," he said with a rueful smile. Hannah nodded, understanding and appreciating his consideration even as part of her wished he would throw caution aside. Probably wise, but they were both smiling as they parted, and the goodnight kiss he pressed to her forehead felt like a promise of more to come. The following Saturday, Bennett needed to go into Las Animas for supplies, and he asked if Hannah wanted to come along. She accepted eagerly, both because she needed some personal items and because the chance to spend time alone with him, away from the ranch and its constant demands, was too appealing to resist. They set out mid-morning in the wagon, the day clear and warm but not oppressively hot. Bennett handled the team with easy competence, and once they were away from the ranch, he seemed to relax in a way Hannah hadn't seen before. He told her stories about the land they passed through, about his childhood and his parents, about the early days of the ranch when everything was uncertain, and every year was a gamble against weather and market prices. "My father used to say that ranching was the most optimistic profession in the world," Bennett said with a smile. "Because you had to believe, every single year, that this would be the year everything worked out. Even when you just survived 3 years of drought or disease or prices so low you barely broke even, you had to wake up and believe it was worth trying again." "Is that how you feel?" Hannah asked. He was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a rough patch in the road. "I used to. The last few years, though, I've been going through the motions more than really believing. It was like I couldn't see past just keeping things going, maintaining what my father built. But lately," he glanced at her with a warmth that made her heart skip, "lately I've started feeling that optimism again. Started thinking about building something new instead of just maintaining something old." In Las Animas, they attracted attention immediately. A rancher and his new housekeeper might not have been noteworthy, but the way Bennett stayed close to her side, the way he guided her through the general store with a protective hand at the small of her back, the way they smiled at each other over discussions of flour and sugar, all of it proclaimed their relationship was something more than professional. Martha Sullivan cornered Hannah in the dry goods section with a knowing grin. "That man is smitten with you. I haven't seen Bennett Oakley look that happy in years." "We're just getting to know each other," Hannah protested, but she was smiling. "Honey, I've been watching people fall in love for 40 years. I know what it looks like, and trust me, you two have got it bad." The word stayed with Hannah as they completed their shopping and loaded the supplies into the wagon. Love. Was that what this was? Could it happen this fast? She had always imagined love as something that grew slowly, carefully, over months and years. But what she felt for Bennett already went deeper than simple attraction. It was respect for the man he was, admiration for how he treated the people around him, gratitude for his kindness, and beneath it all, a bone-deep certainty that being near him was where she was meant to be. On the way back to the ranch, Bennett took a slightly longer route that led through a pretty meadow filled with late summer wildflowers. He pulled the wagon to a stop beneath a large cottonwood and helped Hannah down. "I wanted to show you something," he said, leading her toward a small rise. From the top, the view spread out in all directions. The river valley, the ranch in the distance, the mountains forming a dramatic backdrop. This is my favorite spot on the property. When things get overwhelming, I ride out here and sit for a while. It helps me remember why I'm doing all this. Hannah turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. It's breathtaking. I used to come here and feel lonely, Bennett said quietly. Like I was the only person in all this space with all this beauty and no one to share it with. But standing here with you, it feels different, better, complete. He moved to stand behind her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence like warmth at her back. I know we said we'd take this slow, and I meant that. But I need you to know what I'm feeling, Hannah. I'm falling for you. Maybe I started falling the moment I saw you in town with that faded photograph in your hands. And it's getting harder every day to maintain appropriate distance when all I want is to hold you and kiss you and tell you that you belong here with me. Not as my housekeeper, but as something more. Hannah turned to face him, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. Then, why are you maintaining distance? Because I want to do this right. Because you've been hurt and you're grieving and you're in a vulnerable position. Because you deserve someone who courts you properly, who gives you time to be sure, who doesn't take advantage of the situation. His hands were clenched at his sides, and she could see the tension in his jaw, the battle he was fighting with himself. Hannah reached out and took one of his hands, uncurling his fingers and lacing them with hers. Bennett, I appreciate your consideration. I do, but I'm not as fragile as you seem to think. I've survived things that would have broken weaker people. And I'm capable of making my own decisions about what I want and when I want it. And what do you want? His voice was rough, strained with hope and restraint. I want you to kiss me, Hannah said simply. I want to stop pretending that what's happening between us is anything other than what it is. I want to stop being so careful and just feel something good for once. Bennett's eyes searched hers, looking for doubt or uncertainty. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he groaned softly and pulled her into his arms. For a moment, he just held her, his face pressed into her hair, his arms tight around her. Hannah wrapped her arms around his waist and let herself sink into the embrace, into the solid strength of him, into the rightness of being exactly where she was. Then he pulled back just enough to cup her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing over her cheeks with infinite tenderness. You're sure? I'm sure. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, but Hannah had never been more certain of anything. When his lips finally met hers, it was soft at first, tentative, a question. She answered by pressing closer, by sliding her hands up his chest to rest on his shoulders, by parting her lips in invitation. The kiss deepened, became something urgent and consuming. Bennett's arms tightened around her, pulling her flush against him, and Hannah felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. She had been kissed before, but never like this, never with this intensity of emotion, never with the sense that she was pouring her whole self into another person and receiving them in return. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bennett rested his forehead against hers and laughed softly. I've been wanting to do that for weeks. It feels like weeks even though it's only been days. I know exactly what you mean, Hannah said. Time feels strange around you. Like I've known you forever and also like everything is brand new. They stood there in the meadow, wrapped in each other's arms, and Hannah felt something inside her settle. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it. Not just a place or a job or even safety, but this feeling of belonging to someone and having them belong to her in return. We should probably head back, Bennett said eventually, though he made no move to release her. The men will wonder what happened to us. Let them wonder, Hannah said daringly, and Bennett laughed again, that full, genuine laugh that she loved pulling from him. They did eventually return to the ranch, but something had shifted between them irrevocably. There was no more pretending this was just an employer and employee relationship. No more careful distance. When Bennett helped her down from the wagon, he did so slowly, letting her slide down the length of his body, and the heat in his eyes made her breath catch. When she served dinner that night, he caught her hand briefly as she set his plate down, a small gesture that nonetheless spoke volumes. The ranch hands noticed, of course. They would have had to be blind not to. But their reactions were uniformly positive, ranging from Charlie's knowing nods to Jake's enthusiastic congratulations to Sam's quiet smile of approval. It seemed that everyone had been hoping for Bennett to find happiness, and they had decided Hannah was exactly what he needed. Over the following weeks, as summer turned toward autumn, Hannah's life on the ranch took on a fullness she had never experienced before. Her days were busy with the work of running the household, but it was satisfying work, made more so by the obvious appreciation of everyone around her. The house transformed under her care into a real home, comfortable and welcoming. She began tending a kitchen garden, coaxing late vegetables from the cooling soil. She learned to ride, with Bennett as her patient teacher, until she could accompany him on shorter trips around the ranch. But it was the evenings she treasured most, the time after supper when the work was done and she and Bennett could sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Sometimes they talked, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams for the future, their observations about the world around them. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, simply being together. And sometimes Bennett kissed her, long, slow kisses that made her forget everything else, that made her feel cherished and desired and completely alive. He remained honorable, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but the passion between them was undeniable and growing stronger by the day. One October evening, after the first real cold snap had dusted the mountains with snow, Bennett asked Hannah to take a walk with him. They bundled up in coats and walked away from the buildings, toward the meadow where they had first kissed. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows, and the world was silver and black, beautiful in its starkness. "I've been thinking," Bennett said as they walked, his hand warm in hers even through their gloves, "about the future, about what I want my life to look like." "And what do you want it to look like?" Hannah asked, her heart beating faster. He stopped walking and turned to face her, and even in the moonlight she could see the intensity in his expression. "I want you in it, Hannah. Not as my housekeeper, not as someone who works for me. I want you as my partner, my wife, the person I build a life with." Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Bennett, I know it's only been a couple months," he continued, the words coming faster as if he needed to get them all out before he lost his courage. "I know people will say it's too soon, that we haven't known each other long enough. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Hannah Ashford. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you've brought light back into my world. I love the way you hum when you're cooking and the way you listen to the men's stories like they matter. I love waking up knowing I'll see your face, and I hate the nights when we have to sleep in separate houses. I want to marry you if you'll have me." The tears were falling freely now, but Hannah was smiling so wide her face hurt. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Bennett. I think I started loving you that first day when you handed me your handkerchief and looked at me like I mattered. Like I was worth something beyond just what I could do." Bennett whooped, an uncharacteristic sound of pure joy, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both laughing and dizzy. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings, and Hannah kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into the connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Bennett reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "It was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I know it's not fancy, but it's been in the family for years, and I'd be honored if you'd wear it." The ring was beautiful in its simplicity, and when Bennett slipped it onto her finger, it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all this time for her. Hannah held her hand up to catch the moonlight, watching the diamond sparkle, and felt overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in such a short time. "When?" she asked. "When should we get married?" "As soon as possible," Bennett said immediately, then looked sheepish. "Sorry, that probably sounds too eager. Whenever you want. I'll wait as long as you need." Hannah laughed and kissed him again. "As soon as possible sounds perfect to me. I don't want to wait either. We've both waited long enough for happiness." They made plans as they walked back to the ranch, talking over each other in their excitement. A simple ceremony in Las Animas, with Martha and the ranch hands as witnesses. Maybe in 2 weeks, giving them time to make arrangements, but not so long that the waiting would be unbearable. They would live in the main house together, and Hannah's cabin could be used for a new housekeeper if one was needed, or for storage, or for any number of things they could figure out later. When they told the men the next morning at breakfast, the reaction was everything they could have hoped for. Charlie actually teared up, saying it was about time Bennett had someone to share his life with. Jake cheered so loudly he startled the horses in the nearby corral. Sam shook Bennett's hand and told Hannah, in more words than he usually used, that she was getting a good man and Bennett was getting an even better woman. "I'd like to go into town tomorrow," Hannah said. "I should tell Martha, and I'll need a dress for the wedding." "We'll all go," Charlie announced. "This calls for a celebration. Bennett can give everyone the day off and we'll make it a proper town outing." The next day dawned clear and cold, perfect autumn weather. The entire ranch contingent rode into Las Animas together, a parade of cowboys and one happy couple. Martha took one look at Hannah's glowing face and the ring on her finger and burst into tears of joy, hugging her tightly and declaring she had known it would happen. The whole town seemed to catch the celebratory mood. News of the engagement spread quickly, and people Hannah had only met in passing came to congratulate her and Bennett. The general store owner insisted on giving her a discount on fabric for her wedding dress. The minister, a kind elderly man named Reverend Phillips, agreed to perform the ceremony in 2 weeks' time. Even the usually gruff blacksmith smiled and said Bennett had finally shown some sense. Martha helped Hannah pick out fabric for a wedding dress, a beautiful dove gray silk that would be practical enough to wear afterward but special enough for the occasion. One of Martha's boarders was a skilled seamstress, and she volunteered to make the dress in time for the wedding. Hannah tried to pay her, but the woman refused, saying it was her gift to the bride. That night back at the ranch, Hannah sat at the kitchen table with the fabric spread before her, still marveling at how her life had transformed. She thought of the faded photograph that had brought her here, of her brother Thomas, and how he had believed this place would be good for her. He couldn't have known it would lead to love, but somehow it seemed fitting that his belief in Las Animas and in Bennett Oakley had been what ultimately gave her a future worth remembering. Bennett found her there, lost in thought, and sat down beside her, having second thoughts. "Not even for a moment," Hannah assured him. "Just thinking about Thomas, about how this all started. I wish he could be here to see this, to know that his faith in this place, in you, wasn't misplaced." Bennett took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the ring he had placed there. "I like to think he knows somehow. And I promise you, Hannah, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." The 2 weeks, until the wedding, passed in a blur of preparation and normal ranch work. Hannah finished organizing the house, wanting everything perfect before she officially became mistress of the ranch. Bennett worked harder than ever, trying to get ahead on tasks so he could take a few days after the wedding to focus solely on his new wife. The ranch hands pitched in with unusual enthusiasm, knowing they were working toward something happy. The wedding dress was completed 3 days before the ceremony, and when Hannah tried it on, even she had to admit she looked beautiful. The gray silk brought out the color of her eyes, and the simple cut flattered her figure. Martha had lent her a delicate lace collar that had been her mother's, saying every bride needed something borrowed. The night before the wedding, Bennett reluctantly accepted that tradition dictated he shouldn't see Hannah until the ceremony. He kissed her goodnight on the porch of what would soon be their shared home, a long, lingering kiss that promised everything the future held. "Tomorrow," he whispered against her lips, "tomorrow you become my wife, and I become the luckiest man in Colorado." "Tomorrow," Hannah agreed, "we start the rest of our lives." The wedding day dawned with a brilliant blue sky, the kind of perfect autumn day that felt like a blessing. Hannah dressed with Martha's help, her fingers trembling slightly as she buttoned the gray silk dress. Martha arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style, weaving in small white flowers that Sam had surprised her with that morning, picked from a sheltered spot where they still bloomed despite the cooling weather. The ceremony was held in the small church in Las Animas, packed with townspeople who had come to witness Bennett Oakley finally taking a bride. But Hannah only had eyes for Bennett, standing at the altar in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes locked on her as she walked down the aisle on Charlie's arm. The foreman had asked for the honor of giving her away, saying that Thomas would have wanted someone who cared about her to do it, and Hannah had been moved to tears by the gesture. Reverend Phillips kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Bennett's voice was strong and clear, promising to love and cherish her for all the days of his life. Hannah's voice was softer but no less certain as she made the same promises in return. And when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Bennett kissed her with a tenderness that made several people in the congregation sigh. The celebration afterward was held at Martha's boarding house, which had been transformed with flowers and ribbons. There was food and music and dancing, with half the town seemingly in attendance. Hannah found herself passed from partner to partner as various men asked for a dance with the bride, but her eyes always found Bennett, and his found hers, like they were tethered together even across a crowded room. As the sun began to set, Bennett claimed his wife for a final dance, pulling her close and swaying to the music with a contentment that radiated from him. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Oakley," hearing her new name made Hannah's heart soar. "More than ready." They slipped away while the party continued, riding back to the ranch together in the wagon as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Bennett drove with one arm, the other wrapped around Hannah, keeping her close against his side. Neither of them spoke much, content to simply be together, heading toward the life they would build together. The ranch house was quiet when they arrived, the hands having stayed in town to continue celebrating. Bennett lifted Hannah down from the wagon, and then, before she could take a step, swept her into his arms. "I believe there's a tradition about carrying the bride over the threshold." Hannah laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her into the house, into their home. He set her down gently in the parlor, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the weight and wonder of what they had done settling over them. "I love you," Bennett said simply. "I will love you every day of my life, Hannah Oakley." "And I love you," Hannah replied, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Thank you for giving me a future when I arrived with nothing but a faded photograph and a broken heart." "You gave me something too," Bennett said seriously. "You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive. You brought joy back into this house, into my life. I'm the one who should be thanking you." They kissed then, a long, slow kiss that held promise and passion and the beginning of their life together. When they finally drew apart, Bennett took her hand and led her upstairs to the bedroom that was now theirs to share. And Hannah followed willingly, eagerly, ready to begin this new chapter of her life with the man she loved. The months that followed were some of the happiest Hannah had ever known. Winter arrived, bringing snow that transformed the ranch into a wonderland of white. Hannah learned the rhythms of ranch life through all seasons, the way the work changed with the weather, the way the men adapted to the challenges of keeping cattle safe and healthy through the cold. She proved herself invaluable not just in maintaining the house, but in helping with the ranch's records and finances. Her neat handwriting and careful attention to detail complementing Bennett's broader vision. But beyond the work, it was the simple joy of married life that filled Hannah's days with contentment. Waking up next to Bennett each morning, feeling his arms around her, seeing his face first thing each day, sharing meals and conversation and quiet evenings by the fire, learning each other's habits and preferences and adjusting to accommodate them. It wasn't always easy. They had their disagreements and frustrations like any couple, but they faced them together, committed to making their marriage work. Christmas brought a special joy, their first holiday as a married couple. Hannah decorated the house with evergreen branches and berries, and she and Bennett hosted a dinner for the ranch hands and Martha, who had become like family. The house was filled with laughter and music, with Bennett finally taking out his mother's violin and playing a few halting tunes while everyone sang along. Winter gave way to spring, and with the warming weather came the busiest time on a ranch. Calving season kept everyone working long hours, and Hannah often brought meals out to the men working in the fields, not content to just wait at the house when she could help, even in small ways. Bennett worried about her working too hard, but Hannah assured him she was fine, better than fine. It was in late April, with wildflowers blooming across the meadows and the aspens showing the first green of new leaves, that Hannah realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't said anything, wanting to be certain. Now, with her courses over a month late and morning sickness confirming what her body already knew, she could no longer deny the truth. She was going to have Bennett's baby. She told him that evening after supper, when they were alone on the porch watching the sunset. "Bennett, I have something to tell you." He turned to her with immediate concern, reading something significant in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. More than fine, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Bennett just stared at her, his expression shocked. Then a smile broke across his face, wider and brighter than any she had seen before. He let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "A baby! Hannah, we're having a baby!" His joy was infectious, and Hannah found herself laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the perfection of the moment. When he set her down, he immediately became solicitous, fussing over whether she should be sitting down, whether she was warm enough, whether she needed anything. "Bennett, I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Hannah said with amusement. "I'm perfectly healthy and I plan to continue being so." But his concern, while sometimes excessive, was also endearing. Over the following months, as Hannah's belly swelled with their growing child, Bennett was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He tried to take over all her tasks, insisting she rest, until Hannah firmly told him that she needed to stay active and busy or she would go mad. They compromised, with Hannah continuing to work but at a more moderate pace, and with Bennett stepping in to handle the heavier tasks. The ranch hands were delighted by the news of the coming baby. Charlie declared he would teach the child everything about ranching as soon as they were old enough to sit a horse. Jake started whittling a wooden horse as a gift. Sam, with his usual quiet thoughtfulness, asked Hannah if she would like him to make a cradle board in the traditional Apache style, and she accepted gratefully, touched by the offer. Summer ripened into autumn again, and as the leaves turned gold and the air took on a crisp edge, Hannah's time drew near. Martha came to stay at the ranch in early October, declaring she would be there to help with the birth and afterward. Her presence was reassuring, as was the doctor from Las Animas, who rode out weekly to check on Hannah's progress. The baby came on a cool October evening, almost exactly a year after Bennett had proposed. Hannah's labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Bennett, pacing frantically outside the bedroom, feared he would lose her. But Hannah was strong, and with Martha and the doctor's help, she brought their son into the world just as the sun was rising the next morning. Bennett was allowed in once the baby was cleaned and wrapped in a soft blanket. He approached the bed where Hannah lay exhausted but glowing, and looked down at the tiny face of his son with an expression of such awe and love that it brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "He's perfect," Bennett whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand, which immediately grasped his finger. "He's absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" "Thomas," Hannah said without hesitation. "Thomas Oakley, after my brother, so that part of him lives on." Bennett's eyes were bright with unshed tears as he nodded. "Thomas, it's perfect. He would be honored." They sat together, the new family, as morning light filled the room. Bennett held Hannah's hand while she cradled their son, and everything else in the world seemed to fade into insignificance. This moment, this perfect beginning, was all that mattered. Baby Thomas proved to be a healthy, happy child, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. The ranch hands doted on him shamelessly, and it became common to see one of them carrying the baby around, showing him horses, or telling him stories in voices pitched for an infant's ears. Charlie especially seemed to melt around the child, his gruff exterior disappearing completely. As Thomas grew, the house filled with the sounds of childhood, laughter and crying, babbling attempts at words, the patter of small feet learning to walk. Bennett proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving, always making time for his son no matter how busy the ranch kept him. And Hannah watched her two men together with a contentment that sometimes overwhelmed her. 2 years after Thomas was born, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier, perhaps because she wasn't dealing with the uncertainty and fear that had colored her first experience. Bennett was still overprotective, but he had learned to channel it better, and he didn't try to stop her from her normal activities. Their daughter was born in the spring, during a thunderstorm that seemed to match the drama of her entrance into the world. She had her mother's hair, a rich brown that glinted red in the sunlight, and her father's blue-gray eyes. They named her Rose, after Bennett's mother, whose violin Hannah had learned to play well enough to perform simple lullabies for the children. With 2 children, the house was even more chaotic and joyful. Thomas, at 2, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and frequently patting her head with the overzealous affection of a toddler. Hannah and Bennett navigated the challenges of parenthood together, supporting each other through sleepless nights and difficult days, celebrating every milestone and achievement. The years flowed by, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, already showing an aptitude for ranching and a love of the land. Rose was more contemplative, happier with books and music, but no less beloved. And 3 years after Rose's birth, Hannah gave Bennett another son whom they named Daniel, a sturdy child with a laugh that could light up the darkest day. The ranch prospered under Bennett's management, growing and evolving with the changing times. New techniques, better breeding practices, and careful financial management all contributed to its success. But Bennett was always careful to maintain the community his father had built, treating his workers fairly, supporting the town, and ensuring that the ranch was a place people were proud to work. Hannah remained the heart of the ranch, managing the household with efficiency and warmth, raising their children with love and wisdom, and standing beside Bennett as his partner in all things. She never forgot where she had come from, the desperation and grief that had brought her to Las Animas with nothing but a faded photograph. That photograph still existed, kept in a frame on the mantel, a reminder of the journey that had led her to this life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Bennett and Hannah stood together on the rise above the ranch, the same place where he had first told her he was falling in love with her. Their children played nearby, Thomas at 12 teaching 8-year-old Rose how to skip stones in the creek while 5-year-old Daniel toddled after them. "You ever regret it?" Bennett asked, his arm around Hannah's waist. "Coming here, marrying me, building this life?" "It's been hard sometimes, I know. The work, the worries, the struggles." Hannah looked up at him, at the face that had become dearer to her than her own, and smiled. "Never, not for a single moment. I arrived in Las Animas with nothing but a faded photograph and broken dreams." "You gave me a future worth remembering, Bennett. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." "You gave me the same," Bennett said, pulling her closer. "I was just going through the motions before you arrived. You brought me back to life. You made me remember what I was working for, what it was all for. These past 10 years with you have been the best of my life." They kissed as they had so many times over the years, but it never lost its magic, that connection between them. Below them, their children's laughter rang out clear and joyful. The ranch spread around them, solid and prosperous. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, purple against the evening sky. "Should we tell them?" Hannah asked, a small smile playing at her lips. Bennett grinned. "About the new baby? I think we should wait a bit longer. Let's enjoy their reactions when they realize they're getting another sibling." Hannah laughed and rested her head on his shoulder, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat belly where their 4th child was just beginning to grow. At 33, she was exactly where she was meant to be, with the man she was meant to be with, living the life she was meant to live. The story that had begun with loss and desperation had transformed into one of love and abundance. The faded photograph that brought her to Colorado had led her to Bennett, and Bennett had given her not just a home and security, but passion and partnership, and a love that grew stronger with each passing year. As the sun set over the ranch that had become her world, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Thomas would be proud, she thought. Her brother had believed that the West held opportunities for those brave enough to reach for them. He had been right, more right than he could have known. She had reached for a chance at survival and found instead a future worth living, worth cherishing, worth remembering. The years continued to unfold in a tapestry of daily life and special moments. Thomas grew into a fine young man, serious about ranching and determined to one day take over from his father. Rose discovered a talent for teaching and began helping the younger children in town with their lessons. Daniel showed early signs of having his grandfather's head for business, already at 10 making suggestions about ranch operations that occasionally proved valuable. And their youngest, a daughter they named Clara after Hannah's mother, grew up surrounded by the love of her entire family. Born in the winter of their 11th year of marriage, she seemed to embody everything good about the union of Bennett and Hannah Oakley, inheriting the best qualities of both parents. Bennett's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Hannah found her own brown locks threaded with white. But they aged together gracefully, their love deepening rather than fading with time. They remained each other's best friend and strongest supporter, facing the challenges of life as a united front. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most respected operations in Colorado. Bennett's reputation for fairness and innovation spread, and young men sought positions on his ranch because they knew they would be treated well and learn proper ranching. Hannah's role expanded beyond the household, as she became known in Las Animas and the surrounding area for her charity work, helping new arrivals to the territory and supporting families in need. Martha Sullivan remained a close friend until her death at 83, when Hannah stood beside her bed and held her hand, thanking her for being the first to show kindness to a desperate stranger so many years ago. Charlie stayed on as foreman until his retirement, after which Thomas took over the position, having learned everything the old cowboy could teach him. The town of Las Animas grew and changed as the 19th century gave way to the 20th. The railroad that had once promised prosperity finally delivered, bringing new commerce and new people. But the core of the community remained constant, built on the relationships and values that had sustained it through harder times. On a summer evening in 1903, 25 years after Hannah first arrived in Las Animas, the Oakley family gathered for a celebration. Thomas, their eldest, was getting married to a girl from town, a sweet-natured woman named Elizabeth, who reminded Hannah of herself at that age. The wedding would be held at the ranch, with most of the county in attendance. Bennett and Hannah stood on the porch of the house they had shared for so long, watching their children and grandchildren, yes, grandchildren. Rose had married 3 years earlier and had 2 little ones, play in the yard. The house had been expanded over the years to accommodate the growing family, but it still retained the character Bennett's father had built into it. "You remember the day you arrived?" Bennett asked, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "How lost you looked, standing in the street with that photograph in your hands." "I remember everything about that day," Hannah said. "I remember thinking my life was over, that I had nothing left. I remember Martha's kindness, and then seeing you ride into town and feeling something shift inside me even before I knew what it meant. I took one look at you and knew my life was about to change," Bennett admitted. "I tried to fight it, told myself it was too fast, too complicated. But you were already under my skin from that first moment." Hannah turned to face him, looking up at the man who had been her husband for a quarter century. His face was lined now, weathered by years of sun and wind, his dark hair more silver than brown. But his eyes were the same, that striking blue-gray that had captivated her from the start, and they still looked at her with the same love and desire they always had. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me when I felt invisible, for giving me a chance when I had nothing to offer, for loving me so completely. Hannah, you had everything to offer, you just couldn't see it yet. You brought light and life and love to a man who had forgotten what those things felt like. I'm the one who should be grateful." They kissed, a gentle kiss that nonetheless held 25 years of shared history, of passion and partnership and enduring love. Around them, their family continued to celebrate, the sound of laughter and music filling the air. That night, Lying in bed in the room they had shared for so many years, Hannah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The faded photograph that started it all was still on the mantel downstairs, but she no longer needed it to remember why she had come to Colorado. The life she had built, the love she had found, the family she had created, all of it was testament to the courage it had taken to travel west to an uncertain future. "Bennett," she whispered into the darkness. "MMM." He was half asleep, his arm heavy across her waist. "I love you." "I just wanted to say it again." "I love you too," he murmured, pulling her closer. "Always have, always will." As Hannah drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, in the house that had become home, on the ranch that had become her whole world, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had arrived with nothing but a faded photograph and shattered dreams. The rancher had given her a future worth remembering, a life beyond anything she could have imagined, and a love that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward in their children and grandchildren and all the generations to come. The story that had begun in grief and desperation had transformed into one of hope and happiness, proving that even from the darkest moments, beautiful things could grow. And as the Colorado night settled over the sleeping ranch, as stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, the Oakley family rested secure in the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged, living exactly the life they were meant to live together. The years continued their march, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas and Elizabeth had children of their own, robust boys who reminded Bennett of himself at that age. Rose's family grew as well, and Daniel, when he came of age, surprised everyone by falling in love with a woman from Denver, someone educated and sophisticated whom Hannah worried might not adapt to ranch life. But the woman proved her wrong, embracing the lifestyle with enthusiasm and bearing Daniel 3 daughters who were as comfortable on horseback as they were in a ballroom. Clara, the baby of the family, showed no interest in marriage for the longest time, preferring to work alongside her father on the ranch, learning every aspect of the operation with a fierce dedication. Eventually, she did marry, but to a ranch hand who had worked for the Oakleys for years, a man who loved the land as much as she did. They built a house on the far edge of the property and raised their children within sight of the main house, never straying far from family. Bennett and Hannah grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp. They handed over more and more of the ranch's operation to Thomas and Clara, who managed it together with the same partnership their parents had modeled. But Bennett still rode out most days, checking on his cattle, surveying his land, unable to fully relinquish the work that had defined so much of his life. Hannah, for her part, remained the heart of the family, the one everyone turned to for advice or comfort or simply to bask in her loving presence. She spent her days surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories of the old days, teaching the young ones to cook and sew and raid, ensuring that the values she and Bennett had built their lives on were passed down to future generations. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw a massive celebration at the ranch. People came from all over Colorado, old friends and business associates, townspeople and former ranch hands, all gathering to honor the couple who had become something of a legend in the territory. Bennett and Hannah sat like royalty, holding court, greeting well-wishers, accepting toasts and tributes with grace and genuine humility. During a quiet moment, when the party was at its height and they had managed to slip away for a few moments of peace, Bennett led Hannah back to the meadow, their meadow, where so much of their story had unfolded. The walk was slower now, their steps more measured, but they made it to the rise and stood looking out over the ranch that had been their life's work. 40 years, Bennett said wonderingly. It feels like yesterday and like forever all at once." "I know exactly what you mean," Hannah replied, leaning into his side as she had done countless times before. "Sometimes I still feel like that scared girl who stepped off the stage with nothing but a photograph and desperation. And then I look around at everything we've built and I can hardly believe it's real." "It's real," Bennett assured her. "Every bit of it. The family, the ranch, the life we've made. It's all real, and it's all because you were brave enough to take a chance on a future you couldn't see." "I took a chance on you," Hannah corrected gently. "And you took a chance on me. We built this together, Bennett. Everything good in my life stems from that decision we made to let ourselves love each other despite all the reasons we shouldn't." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors, listening to the sounds of celebration carrying from the house. Their children and grandchildren were down there, all the people they had brought into the world and shaped with their love. It was a legacy beyond anything either of them had dared hope for. "You think this is what Thomas imagined when he asked you to come west?" Bennett asked. Hannah considered the question seriously. "I don't think he could have imagined this specifically. But I think he wanted me to have a chance at happiness, at a real life, and that's exactly what I found, what we built together." She paused, then added softly, "I wish he could have known that his faith in this place, in you, led to all of this." "Maybe he does know," Bennett said. "I like to think that the people we love stay with us somehow, that they see the fruits of the seeds they planted." As twilight deepened into night, they made their way back to the celebration, to their family, to the life that had exceeded every expectation. And in the years that followed, as they continued to age together, growing more dependent on each other and on their loving family, that deep, abiding love never wavered. Bennett Oakley died peacefully at the age of 78, on a spring morning with the windows open to let in the sound of birdsong and the scent of growing things. He went with Hannah's hand in his, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, having lived a full and meaningful life. His last words were of love for his wife, the woman who had transformed his existence from mere survival into something worth celebrating. Hannah grieved, but not as one without hope. She had loved Bennett Oakley for nearly 50 years, and that love had given her a life rich beyond measure. She lived on for another 4 years, spending her days with family, finally learning to let herself be taken care of after a lifetime of caring for others. And when her time came, on a golden October afternoon, she died in the same house where she had spent most of her adult life, in the same room where she had given birth to her children and loved her husband and built a world. Her last conscious thought was of the faded photograph that had brought her to Colorado all those years ago, and of the rancher who had seen past the desperate exterior to the woman beneath, who had given her not just a job and a place to stay, but a future worth remembering, a love worth living for, and a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. The Oakley Ranch continued through the generations that followed, each one building on the foundation Bennett and Hannah had laid. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to wide-eyed children who could hardly imagine a time when their family didn't dominate the valley, when the ranch wasn't the thriving enterprise it had become. But those who remembered Hannah and Bennett personally never forgot the truth of their story. That great love often comes from unexpected places, that courage can transform desperation into hope, and that sometimes, arriving with nothing can be the beginning of everything. The faded photograph that started it all remained in the family for generations, a treasured heirloom that represented not just the past, but the promise that even in our darkest moments, there is always the possibility of light, of love, of a future we cannot yet imagine, but that awaits us if we are brave enough to reach for it. And so the story ends where it began, with a faded photograph and the memory of a woman who arrived with nothing and found everything, and a man who gave her a chance and received in return a love that made his life complete. They lived well, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that proved the enduring power of compassion, courage, and the choice to believe in second chances. In Las Animas, Colorado, the name Oakley was spoken with respect for generations, synonymous with integrity, hard work, and the kind of love story that reminds people that happy endings are possible, that life can surprise us with joy even when we expect only sorrow, and that sometimes the best things come from the most unlikely beginnings. The rancher gave the stranger a future worth remembering, and she gave him a life worth living, and together they built something that time could not diminish, a testament to the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received.